Greetings, pilgrims, and welcome to another episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage. And today, I have some exciting stuff to share with you. We are making some space elements. Now, even though I was on travel last week, that doesn't mean the pilgrimage stops, not in the least. So here we are creating some space elements, and I have 5 of them to show you today. And here you can see the graph. We're going to step through it piece by piece together. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to share with you is this sort of spatial wave. I was working on getting some nebulas down, and I saw one that looked really cool. It looked kind of like this, and I wanted to figure out how to create some more naturally occurring wave sort of energy type thing. So that's what this is here. So we're going to look at how to create that first. Okay, so over here in our initial wave creation, I did a ton of experimenting to try and get this correct. So start with the clouds, and we're going to run it through a histogram scan to sort of crunch those values. Then I'm going to do a transform, move it along, and we're going to blend it together with a subtract. So I'm using my own shape to subtract from my own shape. And the idea here is I'm trying to isolate, if you think of it as sort of like a continent. So what I'm looking at is this content here, or continent, if you will, for our example. And I'm going to cut out and kind of trim it. So now I throw it through another blend, and using the cropping areas here, if you're following along, the values are 0.1, 0.65, 0.07, and 0.75. As you can see, that gets me pretty close. With a little bit of blurring, we could get rid of these things on the edges, but we still have a little bit of a chunk here to get rid of. So to do that, I'm going to take a shape node, and using the square, I'll scale it down. I will then transform and move it into the corner here. And then blending with a subtract, I can cut that piece out. And the idea is that we cut that piece out, and now with our proper blur this is a blur high quality grayscale, 2.91 with the intensity. You can see we've isolated this area. Then using a transform, I'm going to rotate it a little bit and basically just take up more of our square space here. Now I did a bunch of experimenting with moving this around, scaling it, and ultimately what I ended up doing is just almost an extreme transform. I scaled it way out. I don't remember the numbers for here, but you can see my scaling here is about 600% on the width, and then I offset it. I'm looking for just an interesting shape in the middle here, something that might be able to be tiled, although this is not tile safe at the moment, but something that has a higher possibility. So this is a little bit salt to taste, but no big deal. So we have the beginnings of our wave. Now we're going to need some pretty good distortion for this to get our wavy and sort of our, the way energy flows. It doesn't go in a straight line. There's lots of things that get in its way. So we need to have some of those things to get in its way. So starting over here with the clouds, I'm going to transform it and scale it. This gives me the overall horizontal striations. And now I'm going to directional warp it. Now I'm getting some interesting shapes. A little too extreme in some of these cases. Along this edge maybe, but that's okay. We can work with it. Let's go over here with a crystal 2. I'm going to rotate it onto its side. Just a 90 degree. If you look at the settings here, it's warp intensity of 0. I'm just taking the default. And that's what I throw in here into the directional warp to start to get some of this warping. Now I'm going to transform it and move it over. I was just trying to play with some of the shapes in the middle here, just get something interesting. Now down here, this is a crystal 1, and what I'm going to do is throw this into a histogram scan. And if I zoom in, this is what I'm looking for, is to get these high peaks with a sharp fall off. Then I'm going to blur those. So now if you think of this as a 3D shape, the black is say like the tabletop. And then we have the white here is the peak, and it just soft gradient. So we have these sort of weird mountains. That's perfect. So we'll throw that into the warp here, and you can see what we're getting. It's looking a lot like maybe almost liquefied wood. And this is great. This is getting to be very gaseous looking. And this right here would be great for maybe a planetary map if you were doing something like Jupiter. This would be a pretty good start to that. But this is what we're going to use as our wave distortion base. Okay, so over here, I have a couple of wave variants, and these are all built using a clouds. We move it and we blur it, and then we use that as the base of a warp. So see here, here's our first variant, and this is taking from this transform, and again, a clouds 1, transforming to move it a little bit and scale it, And then I'm just going to blur that a little bit, 2.11 for this one, and warp it. And that gives us some breakup here. Okay. Now these are a couple variants I created. This one I really like. This is using a alveus, which is this guy here. Transform to move him around a little bit. A levels to really crunch it. A blur, 16.62. Quite a bit of a blur there. But that starts to give us some of this up and down, almost sine wave-like action going on there. So that's a good one too. Again, using alveus, transform, levels, blur. Just a different variant. That one's pretty cool too. And again, another different variant. And all this was created using just varying intensities and moving things with a transform. You know, take some experimentation time and figure out what works for you. Here's another really good one. I think this is actually the one we went with. So again, this is an alveus, tiling 1, transform, just move them down a little bit, a levels, and then blur. And there you go. So I like this because this gives me this sine wave and it really feels like the energy is alive. So we're going to use that. Okay, so then that's going to go into our coloring. But let's go back here and look at some of the more of the wave warping and the buildup. So with our base wave complete here, this little line, I wanted to start chopping it up in the middle. We don't just want distortion, but we also want some kind of interference. And this interference I'm pulling from over here, this transform of the crystal 2. So that's a warp, very subtle, 0.13. Throw it into another warp. Again, very subtle, but now what we're getting is these variations here on the edges, and it's really kind of fracturing the internals. That's what we want. Another warp, 0.15, and what I'm pulling from for this guy is back over here. We use this a lot. Like I said, this is a really good base usage. So we're going to use that, and then I'm taking a levels from here and I'm blurring it so that way I can get a little bit more control over exactly where and how it's warping this. You don't want it to just go crazy because you'll get a lot of artifacting. You want things that warping on with a purpose. Now this is a directional warp, and what I've done is I've gone a little crazy on purpose to kind of get some of these almost like wisps at the end. You see this a lot with waves and water, how right at the peak it kind of breaks, and is when the crest breaks you get these little pieces that kick off, and that's what I was looking for here. So this is an intensity of 100, turn of 0.02. Then down here I do the same kind of thing, but I'm doing a different turn. I'm trying to get some variety. So I have these two pieces here, and then I'm going to blend them together. And you see now I'm getting both ends, and it overlaps in the middle perfectly. I'm going to use an add linear dodge to really kind of blow that out in the middle. Now I'm going to blend that together with a moved version of this. So this is the same guy, then moved down. Blend them together with an add linear dodge again. And now you can start to see I'm getting a lot of variation here, and it's really starting to come together. Now doing another move down and another blend, I'm starting to get an even thicker wave here, and the internals are overlapping nicely. Now let's warp the whole thing using our alveus trick here, and this gives us some really nice sine wave activity in the middle. And this is at a 2.79. Okay, so we have our wave, and it's nicely segmented and fracted and all kinds of craziness going on in here, and that's great because now we have a lot to work with when we go to color it. So let's go up here and start coloring. So I'm going to take this guy, I'm going to move him up a little bit. I'm going to put the same transform here because I'm going to use a levels, and I'm going to crunch those levels to make some changes to make a bright spot right down the middle of this slipstream. Now when I blend a color into this, you can see here by putting this on top of itself with an overlay, you get a really nice glow down the center. And I needed this transform to be identical so that what I'm using as a mask here had to be driven by the levels, and that levels had to be at the same position. Okay, now I'm going to add this to the background one that we've been doing down here. And this is going to be colored in much the same way. Put your color with the levels. Let's colorize it. Now let's put the two together. Now you can see we've got this energy slipstream down the middle with a nice background. All right. Now over here, we're going to add a little bit of an extra glow. So this is pulling from back here, that levels that we did a second copy of. We're going to take that guy and we're going to levels him again to really crunch the values to make a almost solid white in the middle, and then a quick little fade off at the edges. We're going to blur it 6.56 because we want to get a bit of a softer edge to this. Then I'm going to put that on top as a screen. And you'll see here the difference. Let me see if I can find the difference. So it's this, and then put that on top. Just adds a nice little pop right down the middle, and we get that nice glow. Now, we're going to add some stars. So if I come up here, you can see I took a Dirt 2 and did a grayscale conversion and just a bit of a blur. There you go. And then that's going to be our cheapy stars in the background. Looks good. But now, I didn't like how sharp of an edge we had on this. You can see here it just sort of abruptly ends. So down here, we're doing a bit of an exterior glow. So I'll show you what we have there. So I'm going to take this guy and using an add linear dodge to combine these two before they get colorized. I'm going to combine them together to get the overall total shape. Then using the levels to crunch things out. So you can see we get pure white in the center. That's what we're looking for. And then here I'm going to blur it quite a bit. So this is very similar to a gradient, grayscale, top and bottom is black and then white in the middle. But I wanted white in the middle and it has just a little bit of a bow to it, which follows our overall shape. We're going to levels it again to really crunch it out. And then what I'm blending here is this guy as a subtract, I believe. Yes, a subtract from this guy. So the idea is I have a mask now, if you think about this with the inverse. This center area is going to be our shape, and then we want a highlight here. And we want that highlight to quickly fade off. Okay, so that's what we're getting. Then we're going to levels that to kind of crunch it out a bit more. And then I threw this one last warp up here into everything, so I copied that down here. But that warp is essentially a wave pattern, which is blurred out and then added on in here. And that intensity is very, very low, 0.48. Okay? Then we're going to blur the edges a little bit just so it's not so harsh. And down here, this is creating our mask for our final glow. So again, we're going to put the same warp in there. And this is an invert grayscale. So now we have white is where we want to add things, and black is where we don't want anything added. And again, we're going to do the same blur, because this is our mask and this is our actual effect. Now, up here, that one last warp again. So we're taking our shape and giving it a little bit more turbulence in the middle there. And now we can finally add our coloring here. And you'll see it's very subtle. So let me show you. So from here, look in this area here. You'll see that it's just a sharp transition from our energy field to the stars. And now we have a little bit of a glow that kind of fades off. It's a little subtle. You might not be able to see it very well in the video, but it's definitely there. And that really helps. So now our energy stream looks really good and we have that extra glow. Okay, so now let's jump around a little bit. We'll come back to the Nebula. That's this guy over here, and he is pretty awesome. So we'll come back to him as the final example, but let's look at some of the other things real quick. So to create stars are pretty easy to make, actually. So we're going to take a shape node, and this is a thorn. And as you can see, that's quite star-like already. So all of these grayscale here, I have glow grayscale, and I'm just adding and making slight variants. So you can see this guy is a little bit more reserved. This guy is kind of bolded out a bit more. And this guy has a bold center, but a reserved exterior. So you can make all kinds of variants here using the glow grayscale and just play with your amounts here. For these, I have, if you're interested, 0.85, 0.9, 17.16, 0.06, 0, 19.38, and 0.13, 0.71, 20. Now, to create some star fields that we can put on top of everything, we're going to use a splatter node. And the splatter node here coming off of our star. And my values here, I can let you pause or I can read them off to you just in case. 10, 10, 0, 0, 100, 0.74, 38.27, 58.64, 1096.3, 283.33. Disorder random is true. Pattern size is 5. 200 for a size variation. So that's my settings that created this. And, salt to taste, play with these. I just wanted to get a pretty good assortment of large to small. I also did, where was the size? Yeah, the size variation is what really helps to make some stars that are larger. They appear to be more in front of us, and some much smaller ones that are in the background. Now, then I just colorized the stars here. So this is a color here, let's see, uniform color, and then just blended right on top. And I used the stars themselves as the mask. So there we go. So that's a star. And then here's what they look like on top of the nebula. They look really nice. See there? And then we have another one here. I think the one I'm using is actually that one there. Yeah, and then this is the other stars. So here's 2 sets of stars, 2 different colors, 2 different variants. I just changed all the settings in the splatter node here. Did a blend with a different color. Let's see, this color was that color, and then this color here. And then blending both of those on top of each other just for our final example. And they come out really, really nice. To make some stars inside of Substance Designer is pretty easy. Okay, so we have our stars. Now, what if we want to make a black hole or a wormhole spatial distortion? I really liked the way they represented a wormhole in the movie Interstellar. And so that's what we're going to create here. All right, so using a shape node, our paraboloid, 0.76. This is just to get the edges away from the outside edge here so we don't have weird tiling issues. And then here we're going to do a levels and crunch it down just a little bit. And this levels is actually coming from a transform that makes it just a little bit smaller. And this blend is taking our original shape with our transform on top and a subtract. What that gives us is a little bit of a white edge, and then it starts to really, really quickly fade in, but it's not entirely black. So you can see those connections there. And this levels is from the original here. Now here, doing a divide with the 2 added. So this guy goes into the background, and our levels from our transform on top. With a divide, you start to get this effect, which is really neat. So you have this harsh edge and then a quick fade off. It almost looks like it's a black sphere against the white background, and you have that light bleeding from the edges. That's perfect. So then I'm going to blur that with an intensity of 10. And now, if you take this as like a normal map detail, for example, this would look like a nice hole with a good solid fall off here. But if I throw that into a warp with an intensity of 4 and set that using my stars as a background, look what you get. It's actually pushing out those edges, and it's making this nice distortion. It almost looks like a sphere in space. Okay? So now, if I take that same approach, and I'm going to warp again, but using different settings here, and then blending them together. And now I'm getting a really nice spatial distortion. This looks really good. And here's what we're going to do is this is very similar. These sizes are just a bit bigger. Basically, I copied all of these and just made all the sizes bigger. You can see they get closer to the edge. And by putting this as the background and putting this guy on top of this guy, then you get this really nice effect. So you have the center distortion, and then it sort of has this distorted fall off. And that's what we get there. Very cool. So to create our black hole, we're going to first blend 2 of our previous results together. And if we follow these lines up, you'll see we're taking this shape, and this shape is going to be our foreground. Then our background is going to be this shape. And by blending those together with a max lighten, what we're looking for is a little bit of a ridge edge here, and then basically a globe type effect in the center. Now throwing it into a levels, and I'm doing some crunching here. Then I'm going to invert the grayscale, and this gives us a really nice effect. If you look at pictures of black holes from space, obviously, they do have a little bit of an edge where that energy is just lost at a sudden amount. It does tend to glow just a little bit, but then of course the center is black. So now here's an overlay of putting one on top of the other. So I'm going to put this on top of this, and you get this effect. So that very nice little crisp edge right there, and then a really quick fade off into nothingness. Then I'm going to warp this, and I'm warping this with a transform to make it just a little bit bigger. And then we're going to blend just solid black on top of this effect, and then this is going to be our mask, which is all the way up here, the slightly smaller version as a leveled out. We took the levels and crunched them all the way to the edge. And it has just the tiniest little bit of a glow at the end there. And by putting those together, you get this really nice black hole effect. So it's totally black in the center, and then the edges have this nice little distortion, space is being distorted around this phenomenon, and then that energy is being lost at an extreme rate right at the edge. Okay, excellent. So now, finally, we're over to our nebula. So our nebula is this guy that you've been seeing here. And we have multiple layers of clouds, multiple layers of stars. So let's go ahead and step through him. So I began here with the clouds. So clouds 2 with a random seed of 7. I did a transform to just kind of move them along. I'm trying to isolate an interesting shape in the middle. histogram scan, 0.24, 0.22, and then a levels to sort of start crunching those things down. Now this blend is interesting. I'm just doing a crop, pardon me. So this crop is cropping 0.1, 0.88, 0.13, 0.81. Again, you can see here, if you kind of blur your eyes a little bit, this is what we're looking to get. And we don't care about these external things. Doing a levels to crunch that down. And then I'm blurring. This line is confusing because it's going over top of everything. Then I'm blurring everything. Then this guy, this is the interesting one, pardon me. So this guy is a blend, and I'm taking a levels version of this. Okay. And I'm using this blurred image as my mask. So now that really separates our nebula, and that gives us the core shape that we're going for. Okay, so let's start building him up. So this blend is a min darken of, again, taking a clouds 2 with a different random seed. So this is a seed of 10. Throwing him through a levels and messing around with the settings until I get this. And I'm going to blend with a min darken our nebula shape from here. And you can see what we're getting here is some really interesting cloud development in the middle here. I'm getting some really thin structures, some thick structures, and some nice variation. So that's really good. Okay, transform here just to kind of fill him out in the space a little bit more. All right, so up here, we need to create our color. So this is going to be our color, and I'm taking a fractal sum base and a color that I want and blending with an add sub of 0.15. Now here, blending with a multiply with our color and this guy, we get this. So this is our initial starting point. We're going to build on top of this. Now we're going to use some of these submasks, so I'll go over those next. But we're going to start to add those layers here. Okay, so now we need our first submask. So you can see the changes here. We get these highlights in the clouds, like a high density energy. So where does that come from? Okay, so from down here, we're going to take this, and this is a gradient map. So this is just converting this to use and in color formats down here. But I'm going to do a color to mask, and I'm trying to isolate different layers of the clouds, different sections of the cloud, if you will. And then this blend, all he's doing is taking a mask here. We're sort of doing a subtract in a different way. I'm taking a color to mask, and I'm blending using a histogram scan of a clouds 2 with a totally separate random seed. And this is just to do a bit of a breakup. So the histogram scan lets me break this up. He's at 0.31, 0.17. And by putting that as the opacity for this color to mask, I know that I'm getting areas that are inside of the nebula, but I'm getting a breakup of those areas, if that makes sense. Then I'm going to do a few more by taking this histogram scan and doing a color to mask of it to get some of the highlights in it. So I'm really searching for near white here and then blending those together. And you can see here a couple of these little dots and things that appear. So that becomes a mask. And what I'm doing is putting our color just right back on top. And because I'm doing that as a mask and it starts to build up, you see this overlay effect occurs, even though I'm not using the overlay at the moment. Okay, so that was good. And then this is just another of the same one, but I'm just using a different color, getting a bit more of the buildup. Or maybe are they the same? No, different color. You can see the different shapes there. And again, histogram scan, this guy's, I think he's the same. Yeah, 0.31, 0.17. But because I started with a different base, I get a different amount of the image. And then again, same kind of thing here, just getting some different points. This guy's only at a mask range of 0.03, very, very subtle. And then I throw that together, blend those together, and then a little bit of a blur here just to sort of soften it. And then through a levels to kind of crunch it down. And that becomes our second mask to then throw things on top of that. So let's watch the progression here. So this is our base. We throw it on the first time, throw it on the second time. And you can see the background got some extra pieces to it. Okay, everything's going well. Now, this is to break it apart from a solid black background because we don't really want that. We want to be able to add this nebula to a space scene, okay? So this is just a levels off of our original shape to kind of get a mask, and that's what helps us break that apart. Now here we're coming from way up here for our stars. So quick and dirty stars for the background. There we go. And we'll add those in. Okay, so there we start to see some stars. Excellent. Now, we're going to borrow from this star to do a different kind of stars. Okay, so this is our overall stars. Okay, you're in space. Here we're going to start to add a bit more of an overall star field, and then we can start to add some things on top of it. Because these nebulas are basically collections of stars in space, you're going to have layers to this. You can't just have a single one. All right, so I went about a different approach here to create some stars. I'm using a splatter node, and I'll quickly go through these 0.25, 00, 100, 0.75, pan X and Y, salt to taste on that. Disorder again is 1000. Grid number 8, disorder angle 313, pattern size of 10, and then size variation 198.77. So that gives me general star field here. I'm going to blend that on top of this with a copy and 0.25. So you can see here I start to kind of put on top of my nebula. So I want to make sure that I bring some of my nebula back. So here, this is a little complex, but what I'm doing is taking from, this is a gradient that I created from an image. I just sort of click and drag and get a gradient of colors that I wanted in my nebula. So I'm blending that on top of, using an overlay. Let's follow our line. Back from our original grayscale image here. Okay. And that's an overlay. And this gives me some colorized clouds, basically, that I can then put on top of our existing with a 0.53. So we go from here with our second set of stars, which seems to kind of overpower it. So then we're going to add back on top of that more of our nebula. And that helps to kind of layer this like a cookie, you know? So now you have one layer, then another layer, then the top is the cookie crust again. So now you have that on top, and it really starts to mute some of the stars behind it, which really sells the effect of there are stars in layers here. Okay, one last pass. We're going to add some really bright spot stars. So from up here, black and white spots with a histogram scan, and I'm trying to get some really, really bright points. And then this is just a conversion to allow him to be on top of here and overlay. So this gives us some of those really bright spots, as you can see here. Some of the brightest stars in the sky. And that's how you create a really nice nebula. And then we use that as the background for our star examples over here. And you can see there, that looks really good. We have some nebulas with some stars. Everything's working out nicely. And then over here is just for our presentation here on our cube. You can see we have our base nebula. Now I did use the diffuse here as the emissive so that you can see it a bit better on the video. But essentially there is no normal map, and everything else is just metallic is black, roughness is white. There's no real variance to this because it's not really a PBR type thing. This is just seeing how we can generate some kind of a background texture, and wanted to take on the challenge of making some, you know, celestial things. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed. I tried to do my best to give you guys some good quality content while I was on the road. I do have to take another trip next week, but I am definitely working on things, looking into some inventory questions one of our users had. So we'll be working on that, going back to some Unreal stuff. And I'm actually looking at the newest version of Unity as well to see what's new with Unity. I haven't totally thrown it away. I just been really focused on learning new things. And as always, there's a lot of substance questions that come up. But thank you so much for all of your help, guys. We did hit our 1,000 subs. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you guys are enjoying. If you have any questions whatsoever, even if it's something I haven't covered or something I don't normally do, please ask. I want to make sure that everybody is getting the most out of this series. If you have a question, I want to find an answer, because then we both learn something. So, as always, guys, keep practicing, get better, and I'll see you next time as the pilgrimage continues.